Hello and welcome back to Season 3 of Sequelisers, the show all about fixing bad sequels to good movies. If there's a good movie that was followed by a terrible sequel, you better believe we're going to try and fix it. I'm your host, Jack Chambers, and joining me are the two teams of titular Sequelisers. The team of Alec Plowman.
Hello.
And Stuart Ashen.
Hello.
And their opponents, Tim Maytom.
Hola.
And Matt Stogdon.
Greetings, Highlander. You called.
As you may have guessed from Matthew's
delicious
dialect there. This episode is about fixing maybe the worst film ever made. It's certainly up there,
contender.
And we will get into that oh so much in this episode. We're going to be fixing 1991's Highlander 2, The Quickening. Because that's a thing. Yeah.
Quickening.
The Quickening, exactly. And this is by far one of the most requested things. People have requested this since they heard about this podcast before episode 1 was even out. We're like, oh, by the way, I'm doing a podcast about Fix Highlander 2, it's garbage. And they were right all along. Highlander 2 is terrible. And yeah.
It's almost a work of art in its in its terribleness.
Yeah.
To fail is art. And just the camera pans down to a DVD of Highlander 2. Yeah. Any version.
I hope to fail as art should really be the tagline.
I think that was Highlander 5, but okay. We'll get into all the other sequels later on as well, because good lord, there's like 10 of them.
There's so much to cover with Highlander.
And none of them are any good.
Actually, we'll get into that in a moment.
Don't tell me one of them
There's
is.
one of them that's quite good.
No.
Yeah, I believe Matt knows because he's a nerd. So I'll give it some context, and I didn't really want to come up with anything that hadn't already been said, and I think our old pal Roger Ebert kind of summed it up very well in his review, so I'm going to quote the late, great Roger Ebert. This movie has to be seen to be believed. On the other hand, maybe that's too high of a price to pay. Highlander 2, The Quickening is the most hilariously incomprehensible movie I've seen in many a long day. A movie almost awesome in its badness, almost to quote Tim there. Wherever science fiction fans gather in decades and generations to come, this film will be remembered in hushed tones as one of the immortal low points of the entire genre's history. He's not wrong.
He's not wrong, is he?
Usually old Ebert, we have a few words to say about Roger, we're going to take him, but
A few words and not sounds. Yeah.
A few Glaswegian
mostly just
words.
grumbling and shaking fists at Roger Ebert. But he kind of nailed it in that is, and pretty much as Tim said, it's almost awesome in its badness. It's hard to believe how much this film undoes everything that the first one set up, and all the acting is terrible almost universally, and all the effects are terrible, and we'll get into all of that in a moment. First, let me give you a synopsis, folks, because I hate myself.
Good luck.
And
Can we just briefly give the people a synopsis of Highlander, because I think it's important to put into context.
To cover. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Just how much of a sequel this actually is. Matt Stogdon's going to give us his synopsis of Highlander. Go.
Hello, audience. So Highlander is a bit of a mishmash in terms of actual chronological narrative, so we're going to go with it in a sort of odd order, and I apologise for that. The film covers the story of a group of beings called Immortals, not called Highlanders, as many will be led to believe. There is one Highlander because he comes from the Highlands of Scotland.
sort of, as we'll discuss
Exactly, yeah. So, fucking hell. Even the first sentence already fucking hurdling,
Yep.
falling over. So, yes, there are various immortals, and they are competing for a prize.
The prize,
The
I
prize,
believe.
in fact, yes. And the prize is largely unknown, but they convince it's a source of immense power and all sorts. And the only way to kill an immortal, I believe, just by another immortal. It's never established if it's done by accident.
They can die by other means as well.
Yeah.
It's explored in the sequels.
Oh god, it is, yeah. Fucking hell, it's been a long time since I've seen them, to be fair. Anyway, so the key way and the only way to kill an immortal is to decapitate them, to cut off their head. So they all tend to carry swords around all the time. And when
nothing else can cut off a person's head.
Nope.
You don't need like a chainsaw or anything else that would
Bit
do
of
the
glass.
job.
I've seen The Omen.
Yeah.
So basically, they all have a lot of sword fights every now and again in various places. And when one is vanquished, the power within them is sort of distributed accordingly, and they become stronger and stronger until
what's
finally.
the name of that power in that moment that
That
transfers?
moment is called the Quickening.
Oh my god.
Which
Such
is
drama.
fucking nonsense. And at that point, they become stronger and stronger until lastly 2 remain, because there can be only one. That's a thing in this film and whole series, except it's fucking abandoned very quickly. And the idea is there can be only one, and when there eventually is one, he wins the prize or whatever. And Highlander has a sort of split narrative between 1985, in the inverted commas contemporary period, following Connor MacLeod, who is just sort of towards the end of the contest, as it were, and he's about to possibly win or lose against his old adversary, the Kurgan, played by Clancy Brown. Clancy Brown's pretty good in it.
Clancy Brown's great in that.
Yeah.
Clancy Brown very rarely does anything bad, performance-wise. And it cuts back to his life when he first became an immortal, or had his immortal awakening, as it were, when he was sort of tutored by... Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, who is a Egyptian person who travels to Japan, falls in love with a woman, gets a special sword, goes to Spain and gets a new name, I think, at that point, and then he goes to Scotland, and it's played by Sean motherfucking Connery.
Correct.
Convincing you he has no idea what haggis is, which is astounding. Anyway, so they become friends for some reason, which Highlander 2 tries to cover.
It does.
Well, it's sort of explained in the first Highlander. The reason that they team up is because everybody recognizes that the Kurgan is a bad guy, and they say that because when you win the prizes that you get, is it that you get a wish?
No,
That's Dragon Ball.
You get like untold power and knowledge.
Yeah,
It's like
okay,
all the power and
right.
knowledge, and depending on who it is, it will be either good or evil.
Yeah.
An evil person will influence it to be evil.
Because the
and vice
way
versa.
I took Highlander is that all of the immortals have realized that if the power goes to the Kurgan, then all hell's going to break loose on planet
there's
Earth.
a bit of a good and evil kind of thing, because there's MacLeod has a few sort of buddies along the way that he meets up with, and they all end up dying. And eventually, anyway, so they get to the end of the film, and Connor defeats the Kurgan, becomes the Quickened, I guess.
The
Quickened
Speedy.
Yeah, he becomes the Flash. He gets all the knowledge in the world, and he can hear everything. And in his own words, I know everything, I see everything, I shit everything.
He can read minds and predict the future and all kinds of weird
Exactly.
shit. Yeah.
But
And
maybe
then-
because it's so ill-defined.
It's so weird. And then he's also no longer sterile and can have kids.
And is mortal.
And is
as well.
mortal.
Yes.
You Spanish peacock, you didn't tell me that. Because it's also like a bit of a rug pull. You win. What do you win? To die. Oh, well, I should have just fucking had my head cut off in the first place. What's the point? It's like saying, well, you've had 500 years of being a contestant. Now you have about, I don't know, 40 years of being God. Enjoy that.
The point is that you get to listen to a great Queen song.
That's true. The Queen soundtrack is
The
pretty,
soundtrack of the first one is
pretty impressive.
nothing short of amazing.
Unless you have something to say about it, Alec. Later.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's the general idea of what Highlander is. And again, the misconceptions about it all in terms of what a Highlander is. And it's like, no. Technically, the Highlander in question, arguably, is Connor MacLeod, played by Christopher Lambert, or Christophe Lambert, whichever you want to go with. We haven't decided
It's
which
a
one we're going
point
to go
of
with yet.
contention, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, Jack, tell us what Highlander 2 is.
Yeah.
Right.
Where do we
Are
go
you
from
sitting
here?
comfortably, children? Then we'll begin the
Let's follow the
effluent.
natural
Yeah,
progression
yeah.
of the saga.
Bear in mind, Ramirez dies
Ramirez
at
is
the
dead
end of the first one.
He dies in like the
in the
12,
1500s.
1500s.
Yeah.
In a castle.
Exactly. Ramirez
Glen
is dead
Coast,
and
Scotland,
Connor is mortal. So we pick up. We're in 1999, the distant future of 1999, which is a common thing for us, apparently, people wanting to set things in the distant future of the 90s. Hello, Predator 2.
Before you go any further, Jack, as much as you want to read out the synopsis, it may be worth talking about the fact that there might be 2 synopses for this film.
Yes, sort of.
Because technically...
There's multiple endings and 2 different cuts.
Yeah.
And
We'll
yeah,
come on to that.
We
Give
will-
us
we will get
give
onto
us
that
the baseline
Theatrical or
synopsis.
GTFO?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, fair enough. Continue.
We begin in 1999 when Connor solves the problem of an ever-depleting ozone layer on Earth by devising a giant electromagnetic shield across the entire planet. We'll get on to why that's a big problem in a minute. Because physics, Jack, is pissed off. The Earth is saved, except for the fact that it's now constantly 99 degrees, horrendously humid, and in perpetual darkness. 40 years later, Connor is a liver-spotted old man, heading out of the opera for some reason. Then, we flash back to him on his home planet of Zeist. Oh yeah, by the way, they're all aliens for some reason. The reason Matt didn't mention that in Highlander 1, because it comes out of fucking nowhere.
Yeah.
It's hundreds of years ago on planet Zeist. Connor and Ramirez, yes, that is their name on their home planet. His name is Ramirez, despite the fact he's an Egyptian guy who got a Spanish name from living in Spain, but actually that's been his alien name all along.
Yep.
Because reasons.
Fucking coincidence, isn't it,
Yeah,
lads?
as if
Yeah.
Superman was always called Clark Kent and then he happened to land on Earth and he spoke
Named him Clark
English the
Kent
whole
again.
time. Oh, what a coincidence. Anyway, back on Zeist, Connor and Ramirez lead a futile coup against the ruling dictator Katana, who's played by the fantastic Michael Ironside. Speaking of good villains, Kurgan is great in the first one, and Ironside tries to be good in the second one. Poor Michael Ironside.
Yeah, Ironside just goes so crazy ridiculous.
He
with it.
does,
So,
he does.
Yeah.
Basically, they fail, and he banishes them to Earth, hence Highlander 1. He banishes them 500 years ago because the timelines of both planets line up for some reason, and they teleport, and there's no explanation for any of this stuff.
Also, his name just happens to be a sword on Earth.
Yes, yeah, they all happen to be named after things that exist on Earth, despite the fact there's no connection between the... And they all look like humans. Anyway. Back in the future, that's a line I just said, Katana sends a pair of immortal hitmen to kill Connor. He could have just left Connor to die.
Yep.
We'll get onto that in a moment.
There can be only one, except
Except
these
there's
others
loads
as
of
well.
them. Connor decapitates them and revives himself to his youthful and immortal self via the Quickening. I'm going to say that a lot. Just in time to meet attractive young scientist Louise Marcus, who's kind of a terrorist.
She's completely a terrorist.
We'll get into that in a moment as well. Who has discovered that the shield around the Earth is no longer needed since the ozone layer has healed itself magically. But, unfortunately, the shield is now in the clutches of an evil cartel who wants to control the Earth's resources. Connor and Louise must team up to battle the cartel while Katana sends more emissaries to get Connor. Ramirez, for some reason, comes back to life in the 21st century and is just back and uses his powers
During Hamlet.
arbitrarily. He comes back.
That is one
During-
of the worst scenes I've ever seen in anything.
His death scene is equally bad, and we'll get to that in a moment, because he dies again. Eventually, the good guys kind of triumph, and there's one ending where they teleport. McLeod and Marcus teleport back to planet Zeist, and everything's fine, even though it was kind of an apocalyptic wasteland 500 years ago, and don't know why that's changed. And the other one, he kind of just solves the problem, and it freeze frames on Christopher Lambert's face, just doing a smile for no reason. And I wish I was making this up, but yeah, the fairy tale ending, which sounds terrible, which is the teleporting and they kiss in space thing, is the better of the two endings. Can you believe it? So that is.
I've got some love for Lambert Face. I'm gonna throw it out there.
If we had subtitles to episodes, "Love for Lambert Face" would absolutely be the subtitle to this episode. So that is the summary of the theatrical cut. So there's two different cuts, and we'll get onto that in a moment. First, before we get into all of that, would you guys like to guess the Rotten Tomatoes score
Jesus Christ.
for
Oh,
Highlander 2
It's
and the
zero.
average score out of 10?
It's got to be 0 because there is no way a professional critic could give it a point or recommend it to
Stuart's
anyone.
in at a 0.
I'm seconding that. This
Seconding
film's
the
fucking
zero.
dog shit. Jesus Christ.
12%.
Okay.
I'm going to say 5 just in case some ridiculous people did start compensating.
Plowshans are spot on.
Oh, it's
It is-
a Mulan
it's
2.
our second 0% film. And the original Highlander. Any guesses on that one?
65?
Oh, okay. 65.
Well, that's a tough
Any
one.
advances on
It was
65?
It was a cult thing. I don't think it actually was
Interesting.
received well by
No,
anybody
it was
at the time.
not received well at the time and didn't do well in the American box office either. Ooh,
It was
God.
saved by Europe, as we'll discuss in a moment.
It was
God.
saved by Highlander
Fuck you,
2.
Europe.
More of our crimes.
I'm going to say 47.
Okay.
I reckon that's a good shout. I'm going to say slightly less, 43.
I'm gonna go like 72.
It's 68%.
Oh.
An average of 6.1.
I'm not gonna
Highlander
lie,
2
6 out of
has
10 sounds like a reasonable thing
Yeah.
for Highlander for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't-
Highlander 2 has an average of
5.
2.7 out of 10, which I think is maybe big generous.
People really like Sean Connery, is what we can conclude from
Yeah.
People involved with the film and their mums.
Yeah. So the Renegade version is a recut done by a bunch of the crew funding it himself. Russell Mulcahy, the director, who is returning for the second one. And
then leaving midway through.
Yeah. So they had huge budgetary problems and all sorts of stuff. Basically, they were shooting in Argentina, and the peso crashed in the 80s. So their budget went from like millions of dollars to suddenly that meant absolutely nothing, and they ran out of budget literally overnight because it was fluctuating on a daily basis. And he then came back years later and was like, I didn't get to finish my masterpiece, all that kind of stuff. Even though, and I'll get to that in a moment, he didn't want to make the second one, and that was a push from the European distributors of the VHS, because it sold so well on VHS in Europe that they were like, we need a sequel. People just keep buying this, but we need to give them more. He was like, no, I've told the story of the Highlander. It's done.
He was fucking correct.
There can be only one.
There can be only one. Wrong. There was like 10 of them. So the European distributors pushed him into it, gave him a bunch of money, which then didn't work in Argentina. And it basically just stopped. And they ran out of time and money, and they didn't finish the film, which is why it's so edited and so weird and so mad and insane.
I wasn't aware at all of the whole peso crash
Oh, really?
thing. And it makes me wonder if within the next couple of years we're going to see a similar thing happen with the first film funded in Bitcoin or some other like dodgy cryptocurrency that halfway through just tanks.
It'll be fine. We've plumped for Ethereum for my next film, so everything will be, oh my God!
There's even a short documentary called Highlander 2 Seduced by Argentina, which goes into the whole details of this, which is where I'm getting most of this information from.
That's such a better subtitle than this.
I mean, there was so much corruption going on in Argentina as well, apparently. I'm pretty sure there were stories of how Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery were almost taken in on various scams. Like, Sean Connery nearly bought a mansion, but pulled out at the last minute, thankfully, and Lambert lost all his money on the film because he was, like, weaseling away either in clubs and...
Everyone was drunk on set, apparently, because that's
like
all there was
Mario
to do in
Brothers.
Argentina. And, Victoria Madsen and Christopher Lambert were just shagging the whole time, even though I think one of them was married at the time, if not both of them were married at the time, and it was a whole thing. Sean Connery was a grumpy old bastard. He's Sean Connery, of course he is. Yeah. He returned for the sequel because he was paid $3.5 million.
I heard he gave all that to charity, but I don't know if he... I
didn't. Yeah, the charity of Sean Connery. And he also didn't let anyone on either set mention the words James Bond.
Oh.
Wow.
Because he does the thing where he plays one character and he doesn't return. This is the only character, apart from James Bond, he has returned to play more than once. Yeah. Poor old Sean Connery. So the whole budget crashed, and that was a whole thing. And it ended up being a mess of a film. They even went back and reshot scenes. It's 18 minutes longer, despite the fact they edited out most of the Zeist stuff. And it was released in mid-1995 and is a considerable improvement on the first, because it literally couldn't be any worse. Yeah. And they brought actors back to reshoot stuff. They completely redid like 80% of the special effects. It was partially like funded by the director and the former cast, and some of the crew came back and were like, yeah, we got shortchanged on this, let's remake it and do it correctly and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it couldn't possibly save this movie because it is one of the worst films ever made. And we're going to be fixing the theatrical cut because it is just so bad. The Renegade version still needs fixing, but for all intents and purposes of Sequelisers, the theatrical cut is what we're considering what we're going to fix.
It's worth pointing out that the Renegade cut, while better than the theatrical cut, is still awful.
Oh, yeah. It's gone from like 2.7 to like a 4 point something,
I'd say
like
3.
a 5. Yeah. It's better, but it's not great.
It's not, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter kind of thing. It's like, well, that's a thing.
Exactly. And they're also followed by a bunch of sequels and terrible video games, which might be relevant to your interest, Ashen.
It's some sort of reflection on the Highlander franchise as a whole that Highlander has an exclusive game for the Atari Jaguar.
It's intense. Every Highlander game I've ever seen, or I've played was there a PlayStation 1 one, I think there was, or possibly a PlayStation 2, And there was a possibly recently released one, but that was never actually went through production.
No, that was never made.
No, never actually made.
I must just correct myself. It was actually for the Atari Jaguar CD, I remembered. So managed to get even worse.
Even more
Yeah.
obscure.
And it is utter dog shit.
Yeah, all Highlander games are utter dog shit. But we also have Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, Highlander Endgame, the anime, Matthew Stogdon, because Matt's a nerd about anime, which is actually really good. That's the good one, Stuart, which is called Highlander the Search for Vengeance. And Highlander Source is the most recent one, which I think was in the late 2000s.
Oh, that's got to be 0 on Rotten
2007,
Tomatoes
something
again,
like that.
surely.
Yeah. So Endgame, Sorcerer, and The Source are all terrible, but The Search for Vengeance is actually quite good, and you can watch that totally standalone. I would advise seeing the first film and then Search for Vengeance. Ignore literally everything else in the franchise. All like 15 of the novels, scrap those, and don't worry about anything else.
Fucking bin.
It amazes me with Highlander that there was a franchise, because as you said, there are a shitload of films and then a shitload of novels and 2 TV series and all of this spin-off
Highlander
stuff.
is proof that you can take a really simple, potentially great concept and find an audience for it so
Just
perfectly
Milk it until
and just
it's
milk the
dry.
fuck out of it. And they will just say, I'll take it. And it's like, oh, it's terrible. One could say it's what's happening with the DC cinematic universe.
Oh, controversial. Not controversial. He's right.
In the sense that it's just a case of like, we'll buy it. It's like, it's not good. Don't matter. It's got Batman in it. We'll take it. And that's kind of what Highlander. It's Highlander fans.
You suck.
Yeah. Highlander fans will tend to find something good to say about Highlander 2. And it's usually like say, oh, Renegade Cut's worth watching because of this, and oh well, when they finally got the visual effects sorted in 2007, and they went back and did it again. It's like, yeah. No, there are better films.
In my process of researching, there is a man, I assume it's a man, who defends Highlander 2.
Christopher Lambert.
It's Christopher Lambert's secret WordPress blog. And I'm not making this up, I swear to God. And I will put a link in the show notes if you really, really want it. This is furrysenpai.wordpress.com.
Well.
And
That isn't
his
Christopher
post is
Lambert,
basically...
I can smell his Twitter avatar.
It is called Defending Highlander 2, The Quickening,
My life's work.
filling some plot holes. And it is almost a scene-for-scene breakdown and a plot hole by plot hole breakdown of how the film actually kind of works.
Is it longer than War and fucking Peace?
Yes, it is.
god!
Yes, it is.
Oh my god! Just scrolling.
It goes on for
Somebody
about
put time into
15
this.
pages with accompanying screenshots of each scene. Some are YouTube clips of scenes. It's madness. And the fact that there are enough people to actually defend this shit is insane.
People want it to be good so badly that they will argue that it's good until they are convinced.
Batman versus Superman, anyone?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't surprise me hearing it that the anime version is the one that's the most successful, because like Matt says, there is the core of a good idea in the Highlander, and it's quite an anime idea. I think
completely.
at the heart of it, it's something
Afro Samurai is not that far off. From,
exactly. It's something that if you just heard described to you without any sense of like what medium it was in and had to guess, you would probably go, it sounds pretty anime.
Especially once they turn into aliens.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
it's anime.
And then halfway through the season, it turns out that they're from a different planet.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So speaking of Planet Zeist, let's get into the meat of it, shall we, gentlemen? Why does Highlander 2 need sequelizing?
Sit the fuck down.
let me list the ways.
Before we get into this, I think we should share some of our thoughts on the original Highlander.
Oh, this is a good point,
because
yes.
this is a movie that the Sequelisers have some mixed opinions on, it transpires. And let's get into that now.
So I hadn't actually seen Highlander until very recently for this. And it's one of those films I've been told is good, and it really sounds like my kind of thing, because it's high concept, it's a bit Camp 80s stuff, effects are a bit dodgy, the performances aren't the best, it's a bit rough and ready, it's a bit cheap. That is my jam. But I watched it, and It was not my jam. It was my marmalade. And I fucking hate marmalade. Like, it's a mess. It's like the editing is bad. The performances are bad. Clancy Brown is fun. That is the only good thing. If I had to give a positive pull quote for the DVD case, it would be Clancy Brown is fun. It just, the whole thing, it's got this intriguing concept of the Immortals. It doesn't delve into it properly at all, really, which leaves it a bit mysterious, you could say. Leaves it a bit fucking unexplored, more technically. And just the whole thing, I was totally unengaging. I was so bloody disappointed with it. And I know, years later, a lot of the sort of 80s-ness of it isn't going to stand up in the same way, but I mean, if you're going to watch some sort of campy, high-concept 80s thing, watch something like Robot Jocks, where you will have a lot of fun with it. Not this, where it's kind of dull and Lambert's dreadful and drains at every scene he does, because all he can do is give a smouldering look and move his lips a bit. And then there's Connery, and they're hoovering up the money and pretending he's Egyptian. And I was very disappointed. It's not dreadful by any stretch, but it's really sort of sub-average, straight-to-canon video kind of thing. It was, I was very disappointed.
I grew up on these movies, and I loved the first one as a kid. And unknowingly, I quite liked the second one because I saw it when I was about 7. And I had no concept of what films were. And in an age-old story that Jack Chambers seems to repeat, I saw the second one first when I was really young, just as I did with Predator 2 and Aliens, and had no fucking clue what was going on. So the two guys on the hoverboards with the jetpack Immortal Assassin scene was burned into my retinas as a child, and I couldn't remember anything else about that movie. And I actually really like the first one. I rewatched it. You are right, Stuart, in that it's campy shit, but
which
not
isn't
good
a problem
campy shit.
in of its. Yeah, that's it. That's the problem. It's
I
not
got
fun enough.
If it was good, it would kind of be like Big Trouble in Little China. Big Trouble in Little China nails the campy 80s shit.
Yeah.
The electricity effects are almost identical between these two films. The special effects budget looks almost the same, but Little China actually pulls it off really, really well and embraces the campiness.
It's also aware of itself, whereas Highlander is not.
That's the real problem. Yeah, it embraces the campiness and it's aware of itself, where Highlander is like, it's camp 80s stuff, but we're telling a really deep and important story about humanity at the same time. It's like, not really.
I would pay a significant sum of money to hear Sean Connery say 6 demon bag.
I'm a bit in the middle of all this. So, strange enough, much like Jack, I saw the second one first, because I remember in the early 90s seeing it advertised on TV all the fucking time as a kid.
Yep.
And it looked really cool just because it was really fastly edited. And I don't remember anything other than just seeing dark streets and all of a sudden...
So you're a big fan of Taken, then?
No, because I grew up. So I saw this, all the adverts as a child and watched all this stuff, and then finally saw Highlander 2 and thought, I don't understand any of this. Meh. I think it was a friend had a VHS specifically, because I saw the sort of theatrical VHS release rather than the Renegade cut. Then I saw Highlander 1, and more because of my teenage years, someone said, Highlander's great, you'll love Highlander, and watched it and thought, it's alright. But the problem was, being a teenager, I was like, hey, I want to be cool. Yeah, it's really good because you like it, kind of thing. And then in my early 20s, still kept up the whole, yeah, it's really good because you like it. And then in the sort of mid-20s, when I realised, hang on, people are dickheads. I can have my own opinions. And then I realised Highlander is just okay at best. There's some really positive elements in there, like I say, the core. I mean, the problem I have with it is if you replace the word immortal with vampire, you're like, oh yeah, same thing, except I don't care. There's no threat. I'm not bothered. I really like the whole history angle that you can go back and forth and show flashbacks all different periods of time, except they're all fucking awful.
The sweet haircuts, the Christopher Lambert.
The accents. My God, the accents.
Yeah, he's in that dueling contest. And he's like, I can see you all done live. Oh, fuck off. And then you've got...
Matt Stogdon's Christopher Lambert impression is my favourite Matt Stogdon impression, it must be said.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there are some... Again, I do like the Queen songs, and a lot of people don't seem to realise that the Queen songs that they really love, like It's Kind of Magic and stuff, were written specifically for this
and they
film.
just ended up on the album, which came out the year later.
Exactly.
But they are horribly shoehorned into the film.
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean, really
badly
badly done.
Well,
And then, weirdly enough, there's a bunch of unreleased stuff from the soundtrack as well, like the Queen cover of New York, New York, never actually came out, and the 40 seconds that are in the film are the only 40
yeah,
seconds that exist. Because apparently Freddie Mercury fucking hates that song and refused and didn't let. He had the rights to Queen's music, so he was like, "I'm not letting this be released."
As
and
a
that was it.
little tidbit fact for you, I'm pretty sure Highlander 2 was released the same month that Freddie Mercury died. Somber tone, but also means that technically Highlander 2 might have killed Freddie Mercury.
That could be only one.
Yeah. No, so I think it's an acceptable film. It's not nearly what everyone makes it out to be, and that's kind of the problem. If you experience it on your own I think it's a cult favourite for a reason. It's not going to be accepted by the mainstream, and it's not going to be accepted by a lot of people. It's more for a very core group of individuals. The problem is that core group of individuals seems to have a lot of disposable income and keeps throwing it at the same film, and they keep saying, "Oh shit, they must want tons of this stuff," and then they make tons of this fucking stuff.
I think it's the perfect example of a kind of film, and I think it's very telling of like looking at our shared memories of it, that it is that perfect kind of film to see when you are a little bit too young to understand it.
Yeah.
And you're kind of aware that, like, this is like, oh, I probably shouldn't be watching this because it's got people with their heads being cut off in it. And it's the kind of film that there isn't really a modern equivalent of it. I suppose the closest you'd get is stuff like John Wick, because I think there are parts of it that that are iconic enough to get framed in your brain, like imprinted in your brain, probably a lot better than they actually show up on the screen. Like, I have very vivid memories of like the opening fight in it in the car park, which feels like such a like iconic 80s thing of like, yeah, there's a sword fight in a car park and then it turns into electricity.
So what I'm hearing, Tim, is you like backflips.
Yeah, oh my God. How many backflips does that old French guy do? My God.
That's a clip from the film, I'm pretty sure.
Every cut the audio in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost as many backflips as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie.
Dear God. Yeah. To this day, when I walk into a multi-story car park, I'm like, I'm in Highlander.
Yeah.
And I thought that for like 20 years.
I thought you were going to say, to this day, when I walk into a multi-story car park, I
do
start doing
backflips.
backflips.
I wish.
The only thing anyone ever thinks at our age walking to a car park is, where the fuck is my car? That's literally it. Is this the floor I was parked on?
It's true that there are weirdly iconic moments in it. I always think of the Kurgan saying, "Happy Halloween, ladies," to the nuns. And, of course, right at the end, old Lambert with his arms spread wide, eyes open straight into the camera. There can be only one.
And then strings coming
Blam!
from his shoulders as
Yes.
he's held aloft going, ah, I can see everything.
There's so much fucking wire work in these movies as well.
And again, on a boat, trying to balance, stabilize Lambert and teach him how to get balance and be a better fighter. And having the fucking French Canadian, it described to the Scottishman, haggis, what's haggis? And then him describing it's like, this is wrong. Suspense of disbelief doesn't happen anymore. I can't. It's not, no.
That confused the heck out of me because I thought the idea was that Egyptian stroke Japanese stroke Spaniard, Sean Connery, had spent so much time in Scotland, he had now got a Scottish accent, which is kind of sad. But then he's like, what's haggis? You know, what? So you've only just got to Scotland? Why do you talk like that? You know?
Yeah.
Exactly. The weird thing is, a lot of the problems with a lot of the choreography and the wire work is because Christopher Lambert is basically blind without a particular kind of glasses. He has myopia, which is a degenerative eye disease, and he has these corrective glasses that he couldn't wear on set because there weren't contact lenses that he could swap out. So most of the sword fighting, he's sword fighting blind, and he nearly lost a finger in the first one, got hit or stabbed in the second one, I think.
He sliced
He
open his
did.
own
He did lose
hand.
part of a finger in
Yeah.
the
Oh, he did
second
lose a
one,
finger,
didn't
yeah,
he?
yeah.
He sliced open his own hand because he insisted on using real swords.
Yes, yeah.
And then
I'm blind, but I want to use real swords.
So
That's the thing.
Yeah, Christopher Lambert said, I want to use real swords. It has to be real. And they said, you can't have real swords.
So I'm blind.
I'm going to do it. And then he sliced open his own hand. I'm pretty sure because it wasn't just him, because obviously he had a real sword. I mean, Michael Ironside had a real sword. In a fight scene, I might add, in the original cut, which is two separate fight scenes mashed into one.
So he swapped swords halfway through the fight
does.
scene.
Yeah, to plastic swords.
And clothes.
Yeah, and they still managed to, I think, chip either Michael Ironside or Christopher Lambert's tooth and nearly chop off someone's thumb. It was all a bit ridiculous, and I think someone eventually said it's very hard to execute precise strokes with a 22-pound broadsword. It's like, no fucking shit. Yeah, it's bizarre as shit. But then, as you say, because he literally can't see, it means that he is just flailing blindly. But he also insists on doing like all the stunts, all the hoverboard stuff he did himself.
Oh, yeah.
Idiot.
Christopher Lambert.
Hearing Matt's impression of him now, like, have we seen Christopher Lambert lately? And are we sure he hasn't turned into Tommy Wiseau?
I was going to say, I saw him in Ghost Rider 2. He's
That's not recent.
no, it's recent
in the
in
last
Christopher
decade,
Lambert
I
years.
suppose, well, he's immortal. He doesn't care. Or is he?
But no, you're right. I think Tommy Wiseau is what happens when the quickening goes wrong.
Oh God, it's a slowening.
Tearing me apart, Lisa.
Oh,
like,
hi,
thanks,
Ramirez.
We should, can we get that? Can we
Can
get
we
like,
mash up
Tommy
Highlander 2
Wiseau
in the
and
room?
Christopher Lambert to make another Highlander film? My name is Connor MacLeod, and I'm fucking, I don't know, what the hell's his character? Johnny MacLeod.
Johnny McLeod.
Oh, hi, Connor.
You're my favourite alien from the planet Zeist.
Jesus Christ. So, should we get on to why Highlander 2 needs sequelizing, gentlemen?
Now that we've decided why
Because
Highlander
it's a
needs
fucking
sequel,
abomination.
It is, yeah. The plot doesn't make any sense, and it just undoes all of the internal logic of the first film, basically. We go from, they're all immortal, and they've been battling for years and years, and it's this never-ending contest. Then, oh no, wait, they're all aliens, because reasons.
See, this is the thing. If you watch the theatrical version, they're all aliens who are sent to another planet to have this contest, but for some reason, Sean Connery and Christopher Lambert have an unbreakable bond, because they do. And you only have to call my name and I'll find you.
can I just point out as well that Christopher Lambert remembers this at the beginning of the second movie, because this has never been discussed. He's watching the opera and then he's just like has a flashback and is like, I remember this now. I remember that I'm an alien. I remember how me and Sean Connery used to be friends when we were aliens. and that's it. It's like,
The moral of the story is don't listen to Wagner. You will have fucking flashbacks. So the Renegade, however, is that it's set way in the past and they're sent into the future. So it depends on which version, because you're either watching a bunch of aliens on Earth having a little contest and it's weird, or you're watching sort of time travelers, kind of.
Yes. Time travelers I can deal with more than Planet Zeist.
I don't know.
it's just the thing I love about that is it's like, well, there is a detail that just never needed explaining, and that weird thing where it's like it's science fiction now. I know that before it was mythology,
It was all fantasy and magic
now it's science
and shit,
fiction.
And it ruins all of its own internal logic, including like Ramirez just comes back to life because MacLeod kills 2 immortals, so he has extra energy to bring his old mate back to life in Scotland mid-Hamlet.
Yeah, because it's so weird. He starts to realize that he's immortal again because some immortals have turned up. Therefore, he's gone from immortal to immortal. And
they only show up because Katana, the bad guy, sends them there.
Yeah.
He could have just left him to die because he's mortal. The only reason he comes back and is immortal is because he sends the only thing that can return Connor MacLeod to being immortal again to fight Connor MacLeod, renowned fighter and killer of immortals.
And Connor MacLeod says literally at the beginning of the movie that he is dying. So we establish when the film starts that Connor MacLeod is dying, and then
thanks to the bad guy, he's all powerful and young.
So he becomes young again, and he does some weird alleyway grinding with Virginia Madsen, and then
they just fuck for no reason.
Yeah, and then
in the street.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, and then Ramirez, my old friend, I need you. And then he appears in Glencoe, Scotland, and this is the weird thing, and it sounds like such a small detail, but listening for the Terminator episode, you know me and small details. So basically, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know where I am. And, he's just like, oh, I'm doing Hamlet, I'll just carry on. And the audience of this huge amphitheatre just fucking goes with it. Like, oh, a man appeared out of fucking lightning. This must be part of the show.
This is hilarious.
Yeah, and he
this
goes
is
from them
brilliant.
like, get him off. And the guy's like, will you just fuck off already? In the most English actor kind of thing.
And Sean Connery is like, I don't know what's going on. It seems to be some kind of a play. Then I shall bow and clown for you, my audience.
Yeah,
and
I
everybody
don't think
just
he
loves
actually
it.
acknowledges it's a play. He just goes, well, goodbye, shithead. And
Yeah, because apparently there was no swearing in 15th century Scotland. So he calls him a shithead and he goes, what is a
the
shithead?
amount of things Sean Connery learns in this film, like flying, suits. You can have my earring. Problem solved. Oh, just fucking.
So he's to travel to New York to join Connor. He sells an earring and he gets old school Scottish regalia for no reason and a plane ticket to New York. Despite the fact he doesn't have a fucking passport.
And he just gives it to them. He just goes, this shall suffice for payment. And they look at this old earring and they're like, yes, it will.
That'll do.
What time would you like your breakfast, sir?
So instead of cash for gold, it's earrings for traditional Scottish regalia and no questions asked plane tickets.
Forged passport, you say? Well, us Scottish tailors know a thing or two about forged passports.
There's even in the Wikipedia summary of Highlander 2, it makes a point of saying it's like Ramirez sells one of his earrings, which is apparently enough to buy. When you're getting shade in Wikipedia, you've gone wrong.
It is weird because you have this 2024 apocalyptic wasteland, but the shop still looks like it's a regular 80s.
Yeah, not in Scotland. Scotland's fucking fine.
Scotland's finally like, we're in an element. Problem solved, boys. We're in. No offense, Scotland. We love you.
There's no fucking problem up here, lads. You can take your ozone shield and stick it up your arse.
Speaking of ozone shields, what the fuck who thought that was a good idea? Connor McLeod saves the world by putting it into perpetual darkness, and the temperature is increased to 99 degrees and there's constant humidity, despite the fact our entire source of temperature and the water cycle is the sun.
Yep.
If there was no water cycle, all the water would just land in the seas. There would be no clouds, and would be a desert wasteland on Earth.
It's like the void in the Matrix.
Kind of, yeah.
When they black out the sky, it's that concept of like, well, no, that's not
Or
how
that
our
episode in The
ecosystem works.
Simpsons where Mr. Burns...
Fucking Simpsons every time.
Skipping the fact that somehow MacLeod becomes a scientist at some stage in his life.
Well, he mind reads the group of scientists that he recruits to build the machine, to build the shield, because he gains mind reading powers from the end of the
Yeah, but he
first
doesn't
one.
mind me. They're doing a fucking shit job.
That's not explained in the theatrical cut.
No, I was
it's
gonna
explained as
say-
the Renegade cut.
I was going to say, I don't remember that bit, but I only saw the theatrical. And the other thing is, this is much worse than the problem. The solution is much worse than the problem. I just don't understand. Did they not think about this for 2 seconds? If you go to bloody MacLeod surgery and say, I've got a little lump on my arm, okay, I'll set your fucking face on fire then, you know?
No one's going to get a stupid lump on your arm with a burning face.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, we're worried about the environment and the ecological damage of the Earth and stuff.
Yeah, let's destroy it.
Destroy the thing that gives 100% of the energy to the life and ecosystem of the planet.
Oh, it does look different between the versions as well. In the theatrical version, it's red, and the Renegade version is blue.
Do you know why?
It's something to do with...
There was a
Cows?
studio intercept. They decided that red looked cooler,
Oh, fucking hell's sake.
but it had already been shot with blue light coming through all of the windows and all the interior scenes. So when they finally got to do the recut in Renegade, they turned it back to blue again. And they spent loads and loads of money on a particular laser
Oh, yeah, I know that,
technology
yeah.
to make the lightning bolt effects and the shield. Just those two things. And they...
And no one else has done that. This is the only film that
it was the
appears in.
first time that was ever used, and it's never been used since, pretty much. Because they used... I think there was like a particular filament you have to use or something like that, and they used like hundreds and hundreds of feet of this filament. They ended up using about 5 meters of the stuff in the entire film. So they shot like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scenes and different versions of the shield and different designs and different types of lightning bolts, and they used like 2 lightning bolts and 1 version of the shield, and that was it. And then the studios went, nah, let's turn it red. So they scrapped it all and went just for red instead.
fucking
What?
crazy.
What? Jesus Christ! Yeah,
It really makes you wonder what it would have been like if it had like a competent executive producer who was like, "Nah, let's not shoot in Argentina. That seems quite arbitrary, and the currency's quite dodgy. And let's work out what colour we're going to make the sky before we spend
before we start shooting
millions
maybe.
of pounds on it."
Exactly, yeah. And it's this weird thing where it was so... It went... If the rule was, if it went over budget, and there was the particular bonding companies that held control over everything, if you go over like 5% of your budget at all, we take full control of the final cut, which is exactly what happened. What happened with Blade Runner, famously, and that's why that's been recut so many times, and what happened with this. So the executives and the studios were like, well, we're just going to get a guy like my mate Steve down the road to recut the film because we can't afford anyone else. So Steve's just going to do it. And they're like, we have an editor here. Well, you've already paid him. It's like, but we can't pay him any more. So unless he wants to do it for free, we'll just get Steve to do it. And it's just some uncredited bloke did the final edit of the theatrical cut. It was just a mate of one of the executives. It's insanity.
Highlander 2, uncredited bloke.
Highlander 2, an Alan Smithy production.
Like when you hear everything that went wrong with it, it's almost a miracle that it actually ended up in cinemas at all.
That is true. That is very true. It's a shame it did as well.
It's
It would have been better off on the cutting room
A
floor.
tragedy, some might say.
Shameful miracle.
I like to think of it as a monument to human endurance.
And another reason why I'm okay with the machines taking over. We need to be
I
stopped.
think me watching both versions is a monument to human endurance.
Yeah.
Can somebody, for the audience, describe Sean Connery's death scene? Because I would vomit too much.
He puts his hand up in the air.
He talks about...
In a situation where he should clearly be able to just walk out of the
We'll
door
get
as
into that
well.
in a moment. Yeah, they're trapped in a room with a descending, like, giant fan that has a little spike in the middle, sort of, for some reason, as if that makes it any
Can
more
I
deadly.
just point out that given the proximity, the spike is big enough that it means that when the fan gets to the floor, there will be enough of a gap that they could all just lie down and they would be fine.
The spike is like a good few inches long, so you could probably lie flat and maybe like it would, just miss you kind of thing. But so Marcus and Connor are like, oh no, what are we going to do? And Ramirez just arbitrarily goes, well, true power. If you harness it all in one place, you can do incredible things. And he just pans between the two of them. Then holds his hands up, turns to lightning for some reason.
Yep.
Then the door opens and they leave. And that's it. Yep. Nobody knows why the door opens because he doesn't stop the thing. It keeps going, but he's lightning, so the door opens and they leave. Just open the door and leave, all three of you. It doesn't make any fucking sense.
In the theatrical version, I don't think he turns to lightning. He just stands there and the door opens.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he just stands
In the
there.
Renegade version,
His hand
He
he
just
turns
stands
to lightning.
Okay,
Yeah.
he just stands there and stares up at the thing, and they look at him, and he's like, "Goodbye," and they leave, and then we just see the fan
just, like,
descending.
Don't forget who you are, Connor McLeod, or whatever.
Yeah,
And then he holds his hand as the fan touches his hands. He turns into lightning and dissipates, and then the door opens.
Well, maybe in the theatrical version that's what happens as well. But there is a good
He
point where
probably didn't have the budget to shoot that.
there's a
lightning
good point.
moment, yeah.
There's a good sort of 10 seconds where the door is open and they are they are leaving, and he is just standing with the fan still being like a good 10 meters away from him, and he's just like, I just want to die now. I don't want to do this anymore, McLeod.
And he does the weird thing. It's almost like they invented like force ghosting. It's the kind of similar, but obviously nowhere near as emotionally impactful as Obi-Wan just disappearing into a cloth. And you're like, oh wow, that must be a thing in the Force. This is never explained. He just turns to he doesn't get decapitated. Why does he die? He just turns to lightning
Turns
for
out
some
there are
reason.
two ways. Squishing is another.
Because this is the other thing with that is unless McLeod and Ramirez find themselves in a very specific position in that scene in which the blades cut off their heads,
they're fine.
they are under no threat whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like it
And another real
fucking
problem is like,
retarded.
Katana
Stupid.
is not really a threat to McLeod at any point. He's just kind of a cackling villain who sends minions, but he poses basically no physical threat because he's not a fighter.
Nope.
Despite the name Katana, as we discussed, literally named a sword, but basically poses no physical or really like philosophical
adversarial
threat to MacLeod at all. He's just this arbitrary cackling bad guy who has a bunch of minions.
I think the thing that makes me the most angry about Highlander 2 is that it wastes the name General Katana, because if that character had showed up in like a Contra style
That's a G.I.
arcade
Joe
game,
name, right?
Like, like that is a character that should have a bionic eye. Like
He probably does.
Maybe a
We just
robot
not told
vulture that sits
exactly, and like God bless Michael Ironside doing his best, but he's not an interesting character.
He tries. Poor Ironside.
I'm pretty sure there is a cut out there somewhere where he does have a bionic eye, and there will be 10 minutes of explanation as to why he does.
And you see his brother, Specific Katana.
There is a lot of problems when it comes to the ending as well, because this is where the Renegade cut and the theatrical really blend, because this part of the reshoots that Jack mentioned earlier, you have like a sort of fight scene on a truck roof.
Oh, the moving truck thing.
Yeah, and that's not in the theatrical at all.
Yeah,
and then
that
they go
sounds
above,
cool.
Yeah, and then they go above
it's not bad.
It's all right. And then they go above the shield. Yes. And I'm pretty sure that's in the theatrical, but in a different way. I can't remember now.
No, they don't. They
No,
don't.
they don't at all. Yeah, and they see that, the ozone's fine. Then let's just check it with their eyes. And then at some point, and this is not explained in the Renegade, it's not explained in the theatrical, at some point, Connor gets Ramirez's sword back out of fucking nowhere.
Yeah.
Never explained.
Mid-scene. He just
here it
has
is.
it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sword changes halfway
There's
through the
there's
fight
cl-
scene.
There's clothes changing just arbitrarily. There's props and weapons
Been
just
in my
changing.
butt the whole time.
It's like Black Dynamite halfway through. It's just like, really? We're using this guy? Just recast him
Yeah.
halfway through.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I think it deserves saying again, this film makes no sense.
No.
That's not hyperbole. It's usually, this film doesn't make any sense. I mean, it kind of
I didn't
does.
get
It's just
Inception.
badly
It doesn't
done.
make any sense.
No, I mean, this film properly does not make
It's a
sense.
mess. And it's not really an enjoyable get your mates around, have a laugh, because you just end up having an actual.
Well, you mentioned
sober
Tommy Wiseau.
discussion.
Like, you can watch The
Yeah.
Room and be like, God, this is terrible, but it's terrible in an amusing and interesting way. This is so bad, it's still bad.
Yeah,
Like,
when you would think you're enjoying it, you would turn to someone and say, "Are you following this?" And the person next to you would say, "Not really." Are you enjoying this? I'm not really enjoying anything anymore.
I no longer experience joy as a result of Highlander 2. That's my box quote.
all my taste buds have changed to bitter.
exactly.
It is a film to have an argument with.
Yes.
And arguments about, as we're having.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
So that's why Highlander 2 needs fixing. But you, four gentlemen, I'd like to hear your team names for this episode, please. Alec and Stuart, why don't you go first?
We are the princes of the sequel verse.
Although I'm kind of wishing now we were called Christopher Lambert's secret WordPress blog.
We are the furry senpai. And over to Matt Stogdon, Tim Maytom.
We are too high to lander.
Oh,
Oh dear. Before we get into fixing it next week, why don't we get into your elevator pitches, please, gentlemen? Let me hear some little tease for what we're going to be expecting next episode. Alec and Stuart, the princes. That's what I'm going to call you for now.
so our film is Highlander 2, The End Game,
Oh, interesting.
and was made in 1989. Directed by Don Coscarelli, because we wanted that 80s camp vibe, and he's the man behind Phantasm and, of course, Beastmaster. Returning cast, merely two of them. Brenda MacLeod will be played by Roxanne Hart again. Well, she had a different surname in the first film, but hey, they got married in between. And Rachel Allenstein returns, played by the late, great Sheila Gish. New cast, Declan MacLeod, played by Josh Brolin. Robert Wakelin, played by Morgan Freeman. Kraken, played by Robert Zadar. And Enforcer Parr, played by the mighty Michael Ironside.
Oh, nice.
And, of course, our score delivered by the fine Stuart Copeland.
Oh, interesting.
keep
You've
it
kept Copeland.
Because
Okay.
he was
Damn right.
Who, of course, wrote the theme to the Sequelisers in a roundabout way.
Yes, exactly. And your elevator pitch, please, gentlemen.
20 years after the events of Highlander, Connor MacLeod's son must join forces with a group of renegades to stop a crazed immortal who is slowly enslaving the human race.
Intriguing. Over to Tim and Matt, a.k.a. Too High, Too Lambert.
To Lambert.
Too Lambert!
Yes.
So our film is made in 1994 and is called Highlander, Live by the Sword. Our director is John Woo.
Wow, okay.
This would be his, I believe, his second US production after Hard Target. And we also just have two members of the returning cast. Roxanne Hart as Brenda McLeod, née Wyatt, also married in between.
This becomes the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And Christopher Lambert as Connor McLeod.
Our new cast, being very 1994. We've also got ages, just in case anyone gets all light and pissy. In the role of Ailsa McLeod, Mila Jovovich. She'd be about 18, 19 at this time of filming. And she would, at this point, have only been in Chaplin and Dazed and Confused, but would go on to be in The Fifth Element and He Got Game and a million fucking Resident Evil films.
movies, yeah.
In the role of Ferric Arno from The Lawnmower Man, Freefall, and then eventually White Up and other things, Jeff Fahey, the kind of guy when you see him, you know his face, a very discerning face. In the role of Casey Arno from School Ties, Dazed and Confused as well, and then eventually Mallrats and Good Will Hunting and everything else, and eventually Batman, Ben Affleck. About 21, 22 at this time. And the role of Quinn, only just off really of Shallow Grave, Ewan McGregor. Again, also been Train Spotting and Emma and Brass Stuff and all those things. Again, he's 22, 23 at the same time. And a role of Valerie, a small little supporting role from Double Dragon. And Who's the Boss and lots of other things. Alyssa Milano. The composer is Graham Revell, who's done Hard Target, The Crow, Street Fighter, goes on to do Strange Days, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Craft. Lots of really dark 90s magic sort of not necessarily gothy, but very gothic kind of individuals.
And obviously worked together with Woo on Hard Target.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah.
So our elevator pitch. A mysterious organisation searches for a way to harness the powers of the Quickening, training a champion to challenge McLeod, while Connor and his daughter travel to Ramirez's old home for answers to a series of troubling visions.
Ooh, both quite mysterious, quite intriguing. You'll have to wait until next week to find out, folks, and hear both pitches.
I'll see you in your dreams.